Okay, good morning and welcome to Yeshiva YouTube Table Enabled. Today we're continuing Hilchos B'tzias Apas, starting Kuf Samaches 168. Al Iza Min Pas Mvarchin. What type of bread you make a bracha of Hamotzi? Aleph Ayul Fun of Chatichos Pasu Pas Shalom Akol Min Echad. You have a whole loaf of bread, a challah on Shabbos, or you have sliced bread. Mavarach Al Shalom Afilu Pas Kibar. You make a bracha on the shalom. Shalom is considered more important. It's more chashivas for the bracha. Afilu pas kibar, even if the Ramah says lechem she'eno naki, it's not clean, maybe it's not sifted. The katan, and it's small. The chatichos pas nekia gdola, and the sliced bread, right, is sifted flour. It's a more pure flour. Gdola, and it's bigger. Still, you go with the shalom. Avalim shalom sa'orim. However, if the shalom bread is made out of barley, v'chatichos mechitim, the sliced bread is actually wheat bread. Afilu hiktana. Even if it's smaller, they're smaller. They're slices. The Gemara says really, if you plan on eating from both of them, you should make the bracha on both of them. You take the prusa, which is not as honorable because it's broken bread, and you place it under the whole roll of barley bread, and you make the bracha together. Now the Mishnah Berurah says, Mekar Hadin, really, the chita, the sliced wheat bread, comes first because it has kedima in the pasuk. It says Aris chita usaora, so really wheat comes before barley, even though the barley is whole bread. But to be yotzei yidei shteihem, to be a chassid, that's the best way to do it. Hagav v'chol zek shirotza le'achal mishneihem. The Ramah says only if you want to eat from both of them. When you ain't rotza le'achal me'achad yifsa alav. You want to eat from one of them, obviously you're only going to make the bracha on that. Even though it happens to be around, if you don't plan on eating it, you don't make brachas or take that into account if you're not planning on eating it, even if you like it. If both of them are shalom, one is bigger, one is smaller, you make a bracha on the bigger one. Because shalom, they're both shalom, so then the bigger one that's shalom is more important because it could feed more people. If a person has two halves of a bread, he doesn't have a shalom. Since it's important to make a bracha on a shalom, if you can, you should try to connect them to a be'et. It was just cut, but there's no piece missing. You take a piece of wood, stick it in the bread, and therefore it can't fall, so it's considered a shalom. Technically, it's considered a shalom. Even on Shabbos, you can do this as long as it's not muksa, this piece of wood. And it's called a shalom, interestingly enough. Shalom doesn't mean that it actually is whole. Even if it's broken bread, it looks on the outside as shalom, because again, these are things about chashivas, of looking important at a meal. If it looks like a whole, it is a whole. Let's say a lot of times it happens with challah rolls, right? And they're baked together. You cut off a piece from one of them, and the second one is whole, but it's whole, its own roll plus half of the other roll. You should take off the half a piece so it should look like a whole roll. Even though it looks bigger with the other one, it's better to have a shalom because it looks like a whole roll. Otherwise, it looks like one and a half. Understandably, when you try to separate two rolls, no matter how hard you try, you're going to take a little bit off of the end of one of them. Now, it's still considered a shalom as long as 1/48 or less has been taken off. Still, you should be both say you should break the bread from the other side where it's more shalom. Dalet pasta or nupas kusman. You have barley bread and you have spelt bread. Which one comes first? Barley bread is considered one of the Zayin Minim. Kusmin is a type of chitin, but it's not exactly the chitin in the pasuk. Even though spelt bread is considered a fancier bread, it's more expensive. Pas nekio, pas kibar, you have bread which is made out of sifted flour, and pas kibar, which is made out of unsifted flour. You make a bracha on the one from sifted flour. If both of them are made from sifted flour and one is whiter than the other, as we mentioned many times in my shiurim, that white bread, even though contrary to probably whole wheat bread is considered healthier, but according to halacha, white bread is considered better. White bread has only the endosperm, right? In whole wheat bread, they leave in the germ and the bran. White bread is considered a better bread, even though it's considered less healthy, because it tastes better. That's what's important in halacha. Hey, pasta over nikia, you have pasta that is baked by a non-Jewish baker. It's nothing wrong with pasta akum. Actually, most people are not nizar on pasta akum, except some people are nizar during Aseret Yemei Tshuva. There's an Indian maybe over there, but the rest of you don't have to be. But there are people that are machmir on it. Upas kibar shal Yisrael. So you have bread that's made by a non-Jew, and it's nikia. It's made from sifted flour. It looks better, and you have bread which is inferior, made by a Jew. You're not a person that cares about eating pasakum. You don't have a chomer like that. Mevarich al ezim sheyirtzeh. You can make a bracha on either one. You have a choice because both of them have a mila. One has a mila that it's nicer, and one has a mila that it's pas Yisrael. Even when Nizar pas, if he during the whole year he's careful not to eat bread from a non-Jew, since technically there is a mila, there is an advantage to making a bracha on on the nicer bread, but you care about pasakim, so therefore you should put that under the table and then obviously we're talking about a case where both of them are going to be eaten. So there are other people, you're not going to eat it, but other people are going to eat it. So therefore you put it under the table, you make a bracha on the pas kibar, the unsifted flour bread, even though it's an inferior bread, but you don't eat pas akum. Let's say you're in charge of the meal, it's your house, you're paying for the meal. You don't care about pas akum. You want to eat the better bread, which happens to be pas akum. Abba b'nei beso, his family, Yisrael. However, his family is more machbir than him, than the father. Sometimes you have that. The kid becomes more from than the father. He's machbir on pasakum. Since also pas, he's the one making the bracha. The father is not nizhar in pasakum. It's not his chomra. So therefore, it goes to after the person who was botzeya, right? And that you make the bracha on that. If it's the opposite, where he cares about the pas v'chavim, Yisrael she'eno nizar b'kach meisim al shulchan. He has other guests at the table, right, that are not nizar b'kach, that they're not careful about this. Came with the mitzvah motelas al balabayis, gives someone a yafeh shal v'chavim. Since the mitzvah is on the balabayis, right? Part of the mitzvah of balabayis is to give, to be ayin yafeh, to be generous to the guests. Gives them an ayafeh shal v'chavim, became a shehutra livsa, hutra l'chol asuda. Even though he is normally careful about pasakum, he has to wear. Now we're talking about not where his family. We're talking about guests over here. He has to honor the guests, right? He's having guests over. So therefore, he should do it for the guests. And he should make the bracha on the pasakum because they'll eat the pasakum because it's technically nicer. It's only if the pas was cooked by a Jew, was baked by a Jew, he would like that bread. If he has no preference, he doesn't care whether it's sifted flour or unsifted flour, and even if it was made right, even if it was made by a Jew, it was sifted flour. He doesn't care whether it's sifted or unsifted, so then he doesn't have to be makdim it because there's no mila. Vav pas haba bekistin. Here, the famous halacha, pas haba bekistin. Basically, we'll see the three definitions. What pas haba bekistin is generally referred to as different cakes and cookies and things like that. You don't make hamotzi on this. Literally, pas haba bekistin means bread that came in pockets. You say alamikha. You don't say birchas hamazon. If you eat a shear that normally people would be kaveh suda, there's different explanations in this. There's two main different explanations. One explanation is that you ate the shear of 4 kibetzos, which is 8 kizesim. 8 kizesim is a considerable amount. And that's considered, whatever amount you eat, that's considered, people will be kaveh on that amount of rugalach. You ate 8 kizesim of rugalach, approximately, 6 rugalach or something like that. So then you'd have to, even though he's not filling himself up, you have to make hamotzi because kfiyah suda, berkas hamazon, because you're kovei on it. Pasabah kistan is technically not bread, because the reason it's not considered bread is because people don't establish a meal and they don't sit down for a meal on rugalach. But if you ate a big enough share, that people would do that. The other explanation is that whether people are kovei on it, and it goes based on most people, not what you do. Kovei on it means they'd sit down and make that a staple of their meal. Meaning, obviously, rogalach we're not going to eat for a meal, but other types of things, maybe like they used to make Entenmann's. I don't know if they still make it. I used to rely on these things. Entenmann's used to make these like health bars, which are made out of like Mazonos, and they were filled with jelly and things like that, or with chocolate chips or things like that. I used to eat them. So people, I could see people, if they didn't have bread around, they would just eat it for a meal. So if that's something which people normally be kaveh suda on, so then even though it's possible b'kistin, you would make berachas hamazon and you would make hamotzi. Let's say you only plan on eating 2 rogalach. Then you said barim mizanos. Then you ended up eating 6 rogalach. You should make berachas hamazon at the end, even though you make hamotzi tchila, because you now established you're kaveh stud on it. If you ate a share that people don't eat, less than 6 rogalach, less than 8 kazay. So I'll be shu kovei, even though he went ahead and he's kovei alav. Enam avarech, he says, I'm only hungry for 5 ragalach. Enam avarech ela barim nizanos baracham and shalosh. The bala daito as a koladam. That's halacha. We apply the din of bala daito as a koladam. You go based on most people do. Even if you do it, you're part of the miyah and you don't count. Zayin pasaba bekistin. Yesh mafarshim. What it exactly is? Some say pasha also kamin kisim. It's like pockets. Shemal mos advashos tukar. That goes in mishkenim with tavlin, right? They have different types of cookies, where they put, or different types of cakes where they put something in the center. They put honey in, they put sugar, or they put nuts, pralines, the tavlin. V'heim they cry rishkalash rachla rilach chushu. I don't know what these things are, but if you could think about different types of, an Oreo or something like that, you put some cream in the middle. Some say in the actual dough it wasn't just flour and water. You put honey, or you put oil or milk or eggs. Mine tablanafa or apple juice, right? That's the way you go on the plane, and they give you those rolls, and they say mazonos because they're made of apple juice primarily. We say tamataro is hamei peros tavlin nikra, but you have to be able to taste the apple juice and the bread. Shazen nikra pas gomer. Some say some people are machmir. It's considered pas even if it's with apple juice. Unless you have rove of the juice, right? You need it with water and apple juice. It has to be 51% apple juice. Then, even according to the Ramah, it would be okay. That's the way we're knowing, and I guess that's the rolls they have on those planes. 51% are made of apple juice. A third opinion, the Rip's opinion, it doesn't matter what you put inside the pocket or what you needed it with. We're talking about where it's bread or mizonos that was made like matzah or like pretzels or something very hard. The kostenos, and you have to chew it a lot. Shulchan Aruch makes an interesting psako. Halacha is like all of them, or machmir on all of them, to treat them. If you're kovei asur on all of them, any one of these 3 things, you have to wash, make hamotzi, and bench. Now it's hard to understand because if they're not considered to be bread, then the correct bracha should be bari minuzonos, and the correct thing should be ala michya. Ala michya is only 1 bracha, and brachas hamazon is more brachas. So it really should be savik brachas lahakel. We don't know which one is which, so you should be makel unless it has all 3 characteristics. You shouldn't wash and bench. The reason that the Shulchan Aruch says, as the Beralacha explains, is that really it's not just these 3 opinions are arguing each other. They're just giving different examples, and technically we hold that all 3 opinions could agree to the other 2 opinions, and therefore all of them are considered basava bakistan. Chet lachmani also blasan ava. So you have rolls. There, the blila, right? When you need the water and the flour, it's considered thick. Shakorin ovalish lechem gomerhu. It's considered complete bread. And mavarech alav hamotzi berachas hamazon. Right, challah, something like that with a thick kneading. There's other types of bread. A lot of challah rolls. I would say like airy, right? When there's 2 different types of dough. There's airy. There's doughy challah, and then there's airy challah. right? Nivelish Mavarach Alei. We're not talking yet about pancakes and things like that. We're talking about things like airy bread or certain types of rolls they sell, which are airy, or baguettes or something like that, where it's not. That's called blia racha. It's considered a thin mixture because it's airy, the dough. This is a big fish I'm telling you over here. I believe the correct bracha for baguettes and rolls, certain types of rolls, and certain types of airy type of challah rolls, would be mizonos bracha achas mein shalos. You'd say al michvim kavos sudas. And however, they do fall into this middle category that if you do via suda, mevarich hamotzi ubirkas hamazon, then you would say just like pasava bekistin, it's sort of could be bread, it could be not bread. It depends whether you kaveh suda. The reason if it's challah, you're always kaveh suda because blasa ava like challah, right? That is the main staple of your Shabbos meal, right? People eat 3 pieces of challah, a little piece of salmon, and they dip the challah in all those dips, and they're done, right? You don't have to have the other 2 courses. I don't know why they serve them. If you ate these things in the middle of the meal, shalom achmas suda tunim bracha lifneim lo lacharem. If you ate these types of things, these airy types of rolls in the middle of the meal, shalom achmas suda, not for the purpose of filling yourself up. A lot of times you'll eat airy breads, with herring or something like that, right? You don't have kiffles, you'll eat it with herring. So you're eating it for just to support the herring, so you have to make a bracha. It's not included in your meal. It's not part of the meal. Let's say you have wafers, right? You put some jelly on them or some chocolate on them. Interesting enough, I believe this is what it's saying. And you have wafers, you make a bracha shakol because you're eating wafers not for the crisp wafer part, for the chocolate, and that's really what you do. That's a bracha. Ted pod gomer, feel a pachas megazayas. Let's say you had, again, this is my opinion. I mean, they generally say that opinion in wafers you make them mazonos, but it seems to me that these halachas you wouldn't. You make a shakol. Ted pas gomer, feel a pachas megazayas. Let's say you had bread, which is real bread, which is blaso ava, like challah or something like that, thick doughed challah. Again, it depends how airy the challah is, right? If it's considered airy, if you would consider it airy, it's blia racha. If it's considered thick bread, like most homemade challah, then it's so if you eat less than a pachas megazayas, mavarach hamotzi, you still make hamotzi. You don't bench until you eat a kazayas. Even when you eat a kazayas or a kabetza, benching is only derabban. Only when you eat a svia, then it's dough, right? So you had chavitza, which less than a kazayas. You don't make birchas hamazon. You had chavitza, the hainu piruri lechem shnidbakum yachal alidei marach. Right? Today I'm going to have schnitzel for dinner. So you have breadcrumbs, right? You're right. Sometimes you put it together with soup mix. Most of the time you put it together. They stick together. You put some eggs, right? Some egg juice on the schnitzel, on the chicken breast, and then you stick on, right? And then you dip it in the breadcrumbs, right? So they stick together in this bashel. You cook it, right? You fry it. Frying is the same thing as cooking, I believe, right? So you cook it in oil. Even if they have a kazayas, I'll be she'en bo Torah lechem varach hamotzi berachas hamazon. So if the breadcrumbs are each sides of kazayas, which breadcrumbs are not, much less than kazayas, each individual one has to be a kazayas. Even if it doesn't look like lechem, you say motzi berachas hamazon. Abraham kazayas. There's no kazayas. Avo pisha nira sheishem Torah lechem. Even if some way it looked like actual breadcrumb, like bread, which breadcrumbs don't look like, maybe it depends on the color of them. Now, again, when you're making schnitzel, a lot of poskim say you make shakol because it's just to coat it and to taste it. They were talking about you're eating the breadcrumbs like croutons or something like that. You have croutons that are fried and things like that. So you might eat with a salad. Maybe you'll eat it by itself. My daughter likes to eat it by itself. So then you would make. It depends whether it's a kazayas or not. If it's a kazayas hamotzi, if not. Vimeno mavushal. If it's not cooked in water or fried, but you do put some eggs juice to stick it together or soup mix. And yesh papusos kazayas. Again, if the pieces are big as a kazayas, even though it doesn't look like bread, since they're breadcrumbs, they came from bread, right? You make hamotzi. If they don't have a kazayas, which most breadcrumbs don't. They look like bread. I would say most breadcrumbs don't like bread anymore. And then if it's bigger than kazayas and it looks like bread, Uh, Sorry, even in this case where it's not cooked. Now, croutons are fried. Breadcrumbs are already fried before you do. They're cooked. When you buy the breadcrumbs, it's not actual pieces of bread. These pieces are actually cooked or fried already. So none of these halachas apply. We're talking about actual bread you took off from a piece of challah, and you want to use it to coat something or to eat it, as small pieces. So if it doesn't have a kazayas, right, and it looks like bread, it's still bread. Like we said before, even a piece less than a kazayas of blila ava, like challah, you make hamotzi and bench on it if you eat enough. Doesn't look like bread. Like all breadcrumbs. Mizonos doesn't look like bread. Right? It's not cooked. It's not joined together by any liquids or soup base. It's cut up very little. And again, these are pieces of bread. They're not cooked. They're not fried. So then these are just small pieces of bread that come from a challah, a loaf of challah, homemade challah. You say hamotzi berachas hamazon. I one siman kuf beidal kama sher achil barach ala berachas hamazon. That's because Yud Aleph yesh misha omer the Hirun shenosten b'mayim. The mayim is labne machmas v'Hirun. I believe this sif is talking about noodles. When you put noodles in water, right, it boils and the water becomes sort of white. Azil le tirusa, right? It's gone, right? Noodles don't look like bread. It doesn't look like bread. There's no halacha by noodles even kovei suda because once it doesn't look like bread anymore, it's not bread. Let's say you take wine, you dip it you take bread and you dip it in wine. This the Gemara talks about often. It's hard for me to understand why people would dip bread in wine. It's disgusting. It probably means that bread you eat and then you drink. There's certain wines you drink when you eat bread or certain types of bread. Even if the bread is normally a bread that you make hamotzi on, if you drink it with wine, the wine is the main part, and therefore you make bar mizonos. Venira, the Shulchan Aruch says, is only talking about where the pieces are smaller than a kazayas, because that's generally tafel to the wine. If they're big pieces, then the main part of your meal is the bread, right? If they're small pieces, the main part is the wine. You're having the bread to accompany the wine. Now we're talking about pieces of bread, probably like hors d'oeuvres and things like that, to help you understand what I'm saying. Ava, right? Like homemade challah. In bishlo tigna, right? Instead of you knead it very thick, right? Instead of going and baking it in an oven, you cooked it in water or tigna like donuts, right? Or you fried it. Even though it looks like bread. Now, our present day donuts don't look like bread anymore because you put vanilla or chocolate on top of them and sprinkles. It doesn't look like bread anymore. Or you put jelly in them like on Hanukkah. It doesn't look like bread anymore. But if you just have plain donuts without anything on it, maybe it looks like bread. Right? According to the first opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, even if it looked like bread, you still wouldn't make hamotzi because it wasn't ever baked; it was only cooked. As long as the kneading was a thick kneading, you made it into donuts, right? You fried it. You made it like a sponge. Right? You didn't bake it in an oven. You cooked it in water or fried it in oil like donuts. Second opinion, you make a motzi on donuts. Now, our donuts are not like that. The minig is to be makel because unless you eat the shear, which is a sevia dough, right? So you're chayim birkas hamazon. So therefore, it's only a kavzayis or kabeitza. So birkas hamazon darabon and sabik darabon. The cool, the two equal opinions. If you fear God, you should try to fulfill both opinions. You should only eat in the middle of a meal where you don't have to make a bracha on them, and you'll be covered with the bracha hamazon on the other bread. Again, it has to be where it looks like bread, meaning there's no vanilla or chocolate frosting. Or you have, noodle kugel or Yerushalmi kugel. Certainly doesn't look like bread. It's not considered lechem. Ela pashtida or krepelach mikri Torah lechem. He says pashtida deli roll. Krepelach, we know what krepelach are basically noodles with meat inside of them. That is considered to be the shape of bread. I'm not 100% sure about this. This is what the Mordechai says. I don't know why it's not called pasva bekisten. The meat is inside; it's in the pocket. the deli is inside the deli roll. It's definitely not bread for sure. Technically, if you don't eat enough of these bigavei suda, again, you'd say I'm mizonos and alamichya. I don't know why the Rama says. Is we're only talking about bread, right, where there's no shemen or dvash, and this is right. I think he also means that if it's filled with meat, right, I must be talking about a case where it's actual bread, and you stuff the bread with the meat. But if you have the dough was mixed with oil or dvash or apple juice or anything like that, or I think if it was filled with something, I don't know. To me, it seems like if you're going to say that Pasav Abakistan because the dough was kneaded with other things, also you have to talk about the other opinion that says that if it's ba bekis, it's in a pocket, and that's a deli roll and krepelach are. Part is bar dinah is ba bekis, it would depend whether you're koveya suda on it or not. Most people are not koveya suda. Yeter chalet perish kamin pas cholten osav roschen. Let's say you have bread, and you scald it in hot water. Shachar hafal b'tanra. This is what you do with bagels, right? You knead the dough, then you put it in very hot water, and then you bake it in an oven. Pas gomer hu v'varach hamotzi. That's our minhag to make hamotzi on bagels. Something also which is considered a thin dough. Shafal b'tanra below mashke. That you cooked it in an oven without putting it in water. Do you know kapas v'varach hamotzi l'shlosh brachos? Same thing if you put it in a frying pan, there was no oil in there. You have to put a little ham spray so it shouldn't be burnt. That's not considered frying. Even if you fried it in oil, that's not considered lechem. Now this halacha seems to be in contradiction with what we said earlier, that if it's blilas oracha, it's considered to be. It depends whether you're koveya suda or not. He must mean over here. The only way I can understand this over here is I do not understand this. I'm a lost to understand this. I don't know. I don't know sometimes. Said Vav Troknin the Hainu Sheosin Guma Bekira and Osin Ba Kemach Umayim or Ravan Ba Benefesh Sham. I believe he's talking about over here. We're going to see in the second part of this halakha about pancakes. I think he's talking about waffles. I think that's troknar, the waffles. They're all thicker than pancakes. You make a hole in the kira in the oven, and you put a batter. You put a batter of flour and water. You make on waffles. It's the same thing as pasabak kistan. If you koveya suda, then it becomes like bread. Aval tarisa, the hainu shalokin kemach umayim marvinos of a shofan al kira, spasha v'nefa. Basically, what pancakes exactly are. Ain't love toros lechem klal. That's not called bread at all. But because these things don't look like bread anymore. It's basically the idea. It doesn't look like bread, like pasta and things like that. Or Cheerios, they don't look like bread. You never can be koveya suda. Ubracha achas mein shalosh. I feel the koveya suda so Allah. Even if you're koveya suda, there's no koveya suda by these things. Ted Zion. Basically, I think this type of bread you put on a spit and you put it in the fire. That you made for dips. I think it's talking about like, lachmaniyot they have here in Israel. These things, crackers. Basically, have crackers, or you have, I think, rugelach. Shein ofen es b'tanar el b'lachama. He's talking about the crackers. The crackers, a lot of times they used to bake in the sun, not just in a fire. I don't think it's commonly done anymore, but crackers don't look like bread at all. And I would say also things you put on a spit and you put in the fire. I maybe say maybe that's pretzels. I think like that. Maybe that doesn't look like bread also, and you never could be koveya suda on that also. Yudzayin pashtida nefer b'tanar b'basra b'dagim. Again, this is deli roll or calzones. If you go to a pizza store, you have calzones. You fill it up with vegetables or with cheeses. You make hamotzi brachas hamazon. Totally, if you baked it without liquid, if you fried it in a frying pan with oil, This would have the same din as we said before as sufganim, as donuts over here, basically where you're kneading the dough of the calzone and then you're putting it, you're cooking it in water or you're frying it. So then it's the same machlokas we said over there. The minhag is to be makel over there. Yarish Shamayim to be makra. Minhag is to be makel over there. Unless you don't eat kidei svia, the amount that fills you up. And therefore the correct bracha would be borim nozonos and ala michya. That's the conclusion of today's share. Stay tuned for Ian and Talina when I talk more about the big chiddush I want to say today is that airy bread, challah roll. If it's an airy type of bread, you would not make, unless you're kovei suda. If you're kovei suda, then you would make hamotzi and birchas hamotzi. And if you're not kovei suda, then the proper bracha is zonos ala micha. I'm going to talk about kovei suda and about the airy bread. What exactly is kovei suda and why is it important over here? Why did it change the bracha by certain things like kovei suda from mizonos to hamotzi? Stay tuned, Ian and Talina. I'm coming up next.